Hey everyone, welcome to the Orange and Black Insider Bengals fan podcast. I am Anthony Cosenza. So happy to have you with us, joining us live on YouTube and at Cincy Jungle. We hope you've been doing well over the past week since we last visited with you. Obviously, we're coming off of the draft about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago now, but still a lot to talk about there. A lot of interesting faces, a lot of new faces that have joined the Bengals as we've discussed over the past couple of weeks. And kind of to tie a bow around the NFL draft class and what the Bengals did in this year's crop of rookies, I guess, is our special guest, Joe Goodberry, who joined us, I want to say was it about a month ago, Joe, you joined us right before the draft, and we talked about some prospects?
Yeah, it was about 2 weeks before the draft, and so that makes sense, about a month.
Okay. Well, hope you've been well, buddy. I know we've both been dealing with some new young additions to our families, and sleep is at a premium. So hope you've been getting some sleep. But obviously, you've been doing it for. I'm sure most of our listeners follow you on Twitter and read a lot of what you have to say. But we wanted to have you on the show to kind of recap what the Bengals did in the draft. Obviously, they had last year they had 7 picks. This year they had 11. So a lot of new faces, some very high-profile names for both good and bad reasons. Want to talk about it all. We're glad you're with us. Scott Schulze will be joining us in just a little bit. I just kind of want to start off your general assessment. I mean, I don't want to be too broad because there's a lot to dissect here. But your general thoughts on how the Bengals did. Did they get value overall in a lot of spots? And based on things that I've been seeing from you on Twitter, it seems as if this class keeps growing on you in terms of your satisfaction with what they did.
Yeah, that's definitely true. A lot of times you may feel one way about the class, and then a couple weeks later you'll watch the players in the scope of now knowing they're on the Bengals and how will they use them. Sometimes you'll like them a little bit more, you like them a little bit less. With this class, I'm falling in love with it because I feel like they not only got 4 guys at the top of the draft that could have gone first round, at least top 50 for sure. I felt like they got faster. They got more athletic. They took athletes all the way down into the 7th round. They got weapons on offense. They got pass rushers, 2 of them. If you came into this draft, I think everyone would have said, let's get some weapons to help out the offense. Let's get a pass rush, get a kicker, and let the rest of the picks fill in and special teams in depth. And that's definitely what they did. And it feels like a draft that set up this team to be as good as they are. Before last year, those drafts in 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, where they really just took value at every time, every pick. They had multiple picks. At one point, they had 12 picks in this draft because they traded back in the 2nd round. So 2 trades in this draft also. That gives you some fun for a Bengals fan for if you never expect them to move around much at all. So overall, I think most fans are extremely happy. When I look at the players individually, and we'll get to each one of them, but just as a whole, I think they got faster, more dynamic, better on offense and defense for a team that I felt like was a bad team after free agency. And I mean, coming off of a bad year, but you lose your 2 best offensive linemen on a bad unit. I felt like this was a bad team. Now I'm feeling a little bit better. I feel like they can mask some of the holes on the offensive line with the talent they have around them now. So I'm excited to see where it goes from here. Now they have to play them. I think that's a big thing we always fear as Bengals fans. How are they going to play these guys? Is Carl Lawson going to be inactive for the first 6 weeks just because he's a rookie? I think he can help them now. So that's part of it. How do they respond? Do they stay healthy in camp? We've had that the last few years too, where our rookies aren't healthy to go into the season. So with 11 picks, you got enough guys that should be able to make the team. I think most of them probably do. And if they do, I hope they play and they can make an impact.
Okay. And I agree with you. And here's the thing that I saw. And I totally agree with the free agency thing. It always drives me up the wall what this team doesn't do in free agency. But
Yep.
Even in a move or 2 that they made in free agency, and what they did in the draft, you can tell that this offseason's plan, they learned their lesson in what they saw last year at the end of 2016 in terms of we need to get younger, faster, more athletic, They replaced Malaluga now with Kevin Minter in the middle. I mean, it may not be a huge upgrade, but he might be a younger and slightly upgraded version of Malaluga. And now they've got all these young, fast guys at the skill positions and other places that they added in the draft. Let's talk about, since he was the first pick they made, let's talk a little bit about John Ross. You really liked him coming out of the draft. There were obviously some hesitations from some teams, it sounded like, because of some of the injury issues and things of that nature. Even though I know he was your guy, Corey Davis, I was a little surprised to see him go as high as he did and be the first receiver off the board, just based on some things that I heard. But regardless of that, do you think that the Bengals got good value with Ross at number 9? And he was the third receiver taken at number 9. So do they still get proper value for him? And how do you see him really acclimating to the Bengals offense in the early parts of 2017?
Yeah, and that's why we shouldn't disregard Corey Davis and Mike Williams, because I don't think the Bengals were taking Mike Williams. I think Corey Davis may have been. It sounded like they were always in on Ross. So that was the guy we started to key on the last couple of weeks before the draft. But it was a relief that they did go before the Bengals picked, because now that was never a chance for them. For me, watching those guys and grading those guys, I thought all three of them were top 15 picks kind of guys. I thought the way they played, their value, their upside, what they offered, all different things, because they were all different types of receivers. All of them could have fit in some way. I think Mike Williams might have been the worst fit of the three. But Ross at 9, knowing the other two are gone, makes me like it even more, because I think they would have taken him anyways. But getting a guy with that type of speed is hard to find, and you don't bet on finding those guys later in the draft. When you have a weapon there like that at number 9, you go ahead and take it, because for me, they graded out Williams, Ross, and Davis as top 15 type picks in most drafts. They're better than those three guys are better than Corey Coleman, Josh Doxson, Will Fuller, that last year that went in the 15 to 25 range. All these guys are better than that easily. So, yeah, there's injury concerns and major injuries for Ross. That's obvious. And only one full, strong year of starting this past year, where he stayed healthy the whole season for the most part until he needed surgery in the offseason. So there is concerns with a smaller guy, but he's more than just speed. I know a lot of fans are saying, oh, yeah, they took a fast guy. They took Darius Hayward-Bay. They took Ted Ginn. Those guys went higher because they ran fast. It's not that. I think Ross is Deshaun Jackson. I think he's T.Y. Hilton. I think he's on that level where he's more than just a speed guy. He's a speed guy, a deep threat, because he has crazy ball skills. His ball tracking is as good as it gets. And that's huge for the Bengals, and huge for a companion with Andy Dalton, because he's going to lay it up there, and we don't always know where it's coming down with Dalton, but those guys can adjust and make plays. Marvin Jones made Dalton look so good on a lot of deep passes. Different than LaFell when going deep, but different when it's just James Wright and you're trying to throw it up to him, or Cody Core for last year even. But Ross in particular, I think he's a great route runner, quick feet, lightning after the catch. I think he can be an all-around guy, and the Bengals don't need him to be that, to be honest. They just need him to get the pressure off of A.J. Green. The things you can do now on offense, and go back and watch the first 6-7 weeks last year before they got Eifert. Defenses were just shading towards Green, and they didn't care about LaFell or Boyd. They weren't scared of him getting beat deep at all. Now the safety is going to have to respect Ross on the opposite side of the field. And if they don't, you can go up to him every single time. Just keep throwing it up until they get out of there. What's going to happen is defenses are going to go into a cover 2 shell, which leaves Eifert open, which leaves Boyd in favorable matchups, which leaves Joe Mixon and Giovanni Bernard with less guys in the box to run against. So I think all over, he makes it easier for Dalton. He makes it easier for Dalton to read coverages, because defenses can't mix it up as much. It's going to back defenses away from Green, and it's going to open it up for all the other weapons. So just him being on the field now makes this offense better.
I agree. And one of the things I got to see a lot of Ross here on the West Coast when he played for Washington. One of the things that he's not one of these guys who's a track star trying to play football. He's actually a receiver who can run very fast, at least from everything I've seen and heard from him and watching his tape, watching live games of him. So, in that respect, it's not a project guy per se. It's not a guy they need to teach a lot of nuances to. Before we move on to the other picks, Joe, one quick follow-up. I know there was something that Pro Football Focus put out there, I believe it was earlier on Wednesday, that said, Andy Dalton has consistently been one of the guys who gets the ball out the fastest in the NFL since he's joined the league. There are pros and cons to that. But now with Ross, a lot of people see, the 5-7 step drops and a long ball to Ross. But is he a guy that can also work underneath and still can the Bengals keep that that quick release type of system they have in place with Dalton, with a guy like Ross, and still be able to mask some of the potential deficiencies on the offensive line that seem to be heading their way this year?
Yeah, and I expect the Bengals to spread it out a little bit more to try and help the offensive line and help keep defenses honest, keep them back, not allow them to get guys crowded on the line so you don't know who's coming and who's going. And that should help clean it up. And yes, Ross can do the short stuff. Watch him on slants. I posted a video the day after they drafted him that it was one game. I want to say, I'm forgetting who it was now against, but he doesn't go deep the whole game, and he still ends up dominating with a touchdown, 7 catches. And their slants, their comeback routes, because the corner's bailing so quickly, comebacks and hitches and out routes, because again, the corner is just bailing after an 8-10 yards. He can do that. He can get the screen. He can do a reverse. You get the ball into his hands. It doesn't have to just be go routes. It doesn't have to be speed. It doesn't have to be 5-7 step drops either for Dalton, because Ross gets it out, gets downfield so quickly.
Yeah,
I think you can still do a lot of the things they did before. A lot of their deep shots, if you go back and look, they're off of play action with Dalton under center. That's where they like to go deep because it gives Dalton time to hold the ball. It makes him hold the ball, to be honest, and then he can allow the routes to develop downfield. I think you still do that with Ross and Green. I think you can still do it now with spreading them out, going 4 or 5 wide. And I don't mean 5 wide receivers, even though I feel like they could now after adding Josh Malone also. But I feel like you can split Eifert out. You can split Mixon out. You can split Giovanni Bernard out. Mix these guys around, bunch them up, and you're just gonna help Ross get open. And I don't think you have to do that. He's not a guy you have to scheme for in the way you would for Tyler Boyd and a Brandon LaFell. Green and Ross are creators. They're guys that scare defenses. Just lining them up is going to help. When you say like we're going to get to Josh Malone, but you see him, he averaged almost 20 yards per catch. He is a vertical deep guy. Ross averaged 13, 14 yards per catch, 15 yards per catch in his career. He had 1 year where it was a real crazy year, but he wasn't the all around go-to guy like we saw this past year. When you see him, he catches everything and anything. They move him around left and right side, slot, which I think he can do with him in Cincinnati, which would be pretty fun because you'll get some favorable matchups with Ross in the slot. But yeah, I'm not concerned with him being a one-trick pony. I think he can be a total guy.
Yeah. Talking with Joe Goodberry, draft guru, and you can follow him on Twitter at Joe Goodberry. A lot of good stuff, not only on all kinds of NFL prospects, but specifically about the Bengals prospects. Appreciate you taking some time and chatting with us, Joe. And if you have a question for Joe, either leave it in the comment thread at Cincy Jungle. There's a post there, and we already have some questions in the YouTube chat. We'll get to those. And one is a nice segue to Joe Mixon. Brandon Seaman asks with Mixon, Gio, and Hill, who's I'm sorry, he actually, where was the other one? What do you think of Hill, Gio, and Mixon together? And obviously that kind of just feeds into the Joe Mixon pick in general. So obviously a very polarizing pick. Some people hate it. Some people love it. Some people are just kind of, well, I mean, that's typical Bengals, I guess. But your thoughts on him? Obviously a very explosive player, but is he a ticking time bomb? And as Brandon asked, what do you envision with those backs, especially early on in 2017, now that Mixon's in the fold?
Yeah, the whole wrapping your head around even drafting him is going to be subject to each person. The video's tough, the whole last couple of years of knowing this was out, and he's had other incidences, whether they're big or small or unfounded. So it's hard to say it's been one thing either. If it was one time, maybe you could look past it. I don't know. It's hard to even talk about it because you don't want your team to continually to take those guys that, and it doesn't even have to be a criminal act. It could just be guys that are just seen as clowns or scumbags, and you kind of just makes you feel bad as a fan. But on the field, he is the best running back in the draft. I think he is a complete player. If he was clean, I'd stand on a table, wave my arms, and say I want him at number 9. I think he's that good. I think he's Le'Veon Bell, and I'm not being overly crazy with that. If you watch him, his vision, his patience before the line, the way he sets up blockers and gets them to overrun holes, presses the hole in, and cuts back. His route running and receiving is as good as it gets, probably just behind Christian McCaffrey in this draft. And in the NFL, those two guys are going to go into the top 10 for that category as running backs right away as rookies. I think not only is Jeremy Hill lost his starting job, I think Giovanni Bernard probably has to be a little bit concerned with his role too, because Mixon is better at what Gio does than Gio. Gio's probably a better pass protector right now, but with Mixon's size in a year, and maybe even won't even take that long, Mixon's probably a better pass blocker just because he has the strength to do it where Gio lacks that. So I think a heavy workload for Mixon. I believe he could be rookie of the year, playing all 16 games, running in all situations. The best part about this pick too, is because there's a few guys that I really liked at running back for the Bengals, but go looking at the Oklahoma offense and how they spread everything out and keep everything fast paced and they run out of the shotgun consistently. I thought it was paramount that the Bengals found a running back that could run out of the shotgun without following a fullback, because you can see the difference when Hill's in the game and when Gio's in the game, or in Burkhead even last year. They had to change the offense for Hill every time. They had to get Dalton under center. They wanted to bring Hewitt in. They bring out extra offensive linemen in, and they're running power right up the middle. And that's the only way they could really get Hill off the ground. If he's running out of shotgun, he was a completely different person. It's a big reason why I didn't like Fournette, even if he would have been there at 9. I thought he had the same struggles. But Mixon is the complete opposite. He can run everything. And if you watch Oklahoma, they're rarely run with a fullback. Sometimes it's Samaje Perine coming and taking a cut block on the backside, or it's a tight end blocking for him. But really, it's a lot of zone stuff, a lot of man blocking, but it's in ways that he can cut back and forth. He can pick his holes. It gets to the second level, though. That's what you want. You want a guy with vision and patience that can make somebody miss, and he has that. He has the agility, he has the explosion, he has the long speed. For a guy that's going to run behind a bad offensive line, looking at Oklahoma, and their offensive line was pretty bad for a lot of the clips you'll see and a lot of the games you'll watch. I love Mixon as a player. I think he can be the type of guy that carries your offense, to be honest. I know we have Green and Eifert and Ross now, but honestly, I think a running back like Mixon probably goes top 10 if he's clean, and those guys are rare. And I think he's a better prospect than Fournette and McCaffrey, even though they both went top 10. I think he's better than both of those guys.
Do you believe the rumor that all but I think it was Ian Rappaport that said on draft day, do you believe the rumor that all but 4 teams had him off of their draft board? Or do you think that was just kind of a lot of talk because, obviously the PR nightmare that comes with drafting a guy like that? Do you believe that, or do you think that, that issue was just too much for teams to take a chance on?
I don't know if I believe that, mostly because most teams will say that, I think, afterwards, like, oh, we never had interest, unless he was legitimately off the board, which a few teams leaked that he was off the board before the draft. I believe those. But when players have huge character risks or injury risks, a lot of times you'll say they're off the board, and you may see this if you ever get a clip of teams' big boards. They're really just off to the right, and they go on a sub board at that point, and they'll have a red sticker on them for medical. It could be yellow, it could be other things, but it doesn't mean that they're off the board completely. It just means we're not taking them at this spot, but we'll consider them if he's still there and we have him ranked, let's say, number 12 overall, and we're in there in the third round. That guy's still there. We'll take him. But I think that's a way of saying he's off our board without actually taking him off. And I don't know, maybe 4 teams, maybe it was down to that. The video is horrific. So,
Right.
I could see teams saying, we don't want this headache. It's a running back. We may only get 5 years out of him and then kick him to the curb anyways. We can find running backs anywhere, especially in this class. That was a pretty good class. So maybe, but I think more teams would have taken him if the value was correct. For the Bengals, they put a premium on it. I think obviously that was as early as they were going to go. There were some teams, there were rumors that Mixon could have gone in the 30s. Bengals felt comfortable falling back after Kamara and Cook were still there. And I think at that point, those next few teams, whether it was the Eagles or Raiders or a couple others that were apparently had him on the board, I think he was probably going in the next 10 or 15 picks.
Yeah, we've got a couple people in the YouTube chat saying it was Trigger Jones who said he visited too many teams to only have 4 interested.
Yeah.
Mr. Sinister said all 32 teams went to his pro day. Why do such diligence if due diligence if it's too much to deal with? Good points there. Brandon Seaman also said is just a real quick follow-up. It's not necessarily on Mixon, but he does impact this player. Obviously, is Hill getting cut or traded? I personally do not think so. I think he's staying in Cincinnati for better or for worse. Maybe he becomes the short yardage guy, the goal line guy, and maybe that's what he gets relegated to. In my opinion, do you think the same, or what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that completely, especially with Gio being hurt currently. I think he would have to prove that he's I think Mixon would have to prove he can not only handle the load and be reliable for every game, every week. So I think there's some question marks, even if Hill is potentially the number 3 back on that depth chart. I think those other 2 guys ahead of him have to answer some questions first. And I don't think he'd get much in a trade. I don't even know what you would get for him. 6th, 7th rounder, the way he's played, and it being a running back on the last year of his deal. There's just not much value there.
Yeah, and if there's one saving grace, even though some people were vehemently against Mixon being a Bengal or even getting drafted by any team, I suppose it would be that the Bengals moved back and still got him and not moved up for a player like that. I mean, it's a small nuance, but to me, I would not be comfortable if they moved up to get a guy like that, unless it was, I guess, super late in the draft. But
I said that during the draft, round 1, when they were like, oh, maybe this team will trade up or maybe that, and I'm like, it doesn't make sense. It's a harder sell if you're taking that guy not with your first pick, and it's a harder sell if you're trading up and giving other picks for him. I didn't consider the fact of trading back and getting him, but obviously that sells much easier. If you're getting a guy like Josh Malone and Mixon, that makes it a little easier to stomach.
Yeah, definitely. Let's move on. Now the Bengals did what they normally do in the sense that they take best player available, but they mixed that this year with need. And obviously one of the more popular picks in terms of value was Jordan Willis, the defensive end out of Kansas State. They grabbed him in the 3rd round. Some people thought he could go late first. Some of those, I read an article, I think it was by Rebecca Toback on Cincy Jungle, who had interviewed someone with the SB Nation Kansas State blog, and they said they were baffled that he didn't go in the 2nd round. Obviously, there's some, from what I understand, some stiffness, some, bending off the edge, that sort of thing. But the production is there, and the workout numbers were actually seemed to far surpass some of the limitations that were knocks on him coming in before the draft. So, what are your thoughts on Willis? And obviously the Bengals might have did they get a steal in the 3rd round with this kid?
Yeah, they probably did, just based on value and where a guy with those measurables should go. I didn't love Willis, and it's mostly because his tape. I think he had fantastic measurables, fantastic production. The tape was, it was okay. Even though it's hard to say, well, production, tape, isn't that the same thing? It really isn't, because all sacks aren't equal, all pressures aren't equal. It's based on situation. How do they win? Can they replicate that win? For Willis, like I said, I thought there was a lot of stiffness on tape, a lot of late getting off the ball, a lot of just relied on the power move, some awareness issues on run plays where he didn't always see the ball carrier, or always didn't follow him correctly, or didn't get his head on the right side so he can make a play and shed the blocker. So there was a lot of things, and I compared him, and it wasn't supposed to be a literal comparison, but I compared him to Marcus Hunt only because Hunt tested crazy and he did not show that on tape. Hunt was a power rusher that couldn't turn the corner, much like Willis. A lot of people would say that about Willis, but with Hunt's size too, it limited him so much more. I don't think Willis will struggle with the same limitations Hunt had, and he's not 25 years old and he's not from another country. So Willis doesn't have those big factors against him. He's young, he's super productive, tested very well. I didn't like the idea of taking him maybe at the second round pick. I thought I would take him at that spot because with that athletic profile, chances are he's going to be a good player, even if he's not an all-pro type. Those guys have a 12 times chance of being a productive player into a second contract if they have passed this threshold for pass rushers. It's very important for pass rushers, and there was only 7 guys that passed it. Jordan Willis was one of them, so he's one of the guys you wanted to take at some point. So when he's there in the third round, I'm all for it at that point. That's where you want to take guys that have athletic upside, that have the production, that maybe have a little things you need to clean up. And a lot of it is technical. A lot of his stiffness is technical, and you'll see it when he's trying to bend the edge or come around the arc, and your feet and his hips and his shoulders are kind of disjointed. You want to be facing the quarterback. Your feet want to be turned to the quarterback. You want to turn your hips or your shoulders first so you can for sure your hips will follow. Things like that are just off a little bit. And if he cleans up his handwork, it'll help him get cleaner. It'll help him turn that corner a little bit better. I like him as a left end pass rushing. He never really did it much on the right side. I think that's what the Bengals need. So that was another thing that I wasn't sure about. His athletic profile says he can do it, and says, if they develop him at that side, maybe he can do it. So there were some concerns there, but when the next pick comes, and we'll get to it in Carl Lawson, I was like, okay, there's their right guy, and maybe Willis is their left guy. So, if that's the way it works out, I really like it. I hope they don't force Willis on the right side and completely have to develop him over there, even though that's the spot they need. I think, you can move some other guys around, I think Willis or Lawson could also rush from inside. Dunlap did it at Florida. I think as he gets older, you can kick him inside. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. But getting an athlete, getting someone with that athletic profile on the defensive line really is exciting.
You're cutting out a little bit there, Joe. We may need to there. I think it's a little better. But yeah, I do agree with you there. Moving on, and it was a good segue. By the way, we're talking with Joe Goodberry on Twitter at Joe Goodberry, draft expert, and a lot of good knowledge that he brings on Twitter, and a fan favorite. I like the Lawson pick. Okay, in the fourth round, I think a lot of that was another value pick. Right after the quarterback. This is a team that plays in a division with gigantic quarterbacks that you need to bring down to the ground with regularity. You need to hit them often. And so I like the idea that they're supplementing a couple of Pro Bowl players they have on the defensive line already with some other good edge rushers. Now, I'm a little worried, Joe, that the Bengals are going full Bengals here, and they've listed Lawson as a linebacker. And if they had employed a 3-4 defense, I would say, thumbs up, good job. This is exactly, if they had a Steelers-like defense or something like that, that would fit the profile. Now, they ask their linebackers on the outside to do more in terms of playing in space, playing coverage, that sort of thing. Lawson did a little bit of that at Auburn, but obviously his specialty was getting after the quarterback. So I'm a little worried that they might waste some potential. Am I overreacting?
No, it's always a concern when you draft a guy and you want to label him at a new position. For Lawson, he played in a 3-3-5 defense for Alabama as an outside linebacker, which is like a 3-4 in the NFL, but college is always in nickel or dime now. So he did a little bit of space work, but he is a player that moves forward. He's a pass rusher. So looking at him and saying, well, I wish they're in a 3-4 or 4-3, I may feel more comfortable as a 3-4 player. I think sometimes we get too caught up in that because the NFL is turning more into a nickel defense. And even when you watch the Steelers, they're just playing with 2 defensive linemen, 2 edge guys, and then 2 linebackers at that point. And I think whether you're standing Lawson up or you're putting his hand in the dirt, I think he can be a very effective pass rusher. He's one of the most technically advanced rushers coming into this draft. Again, he's got a lot of stiffness, but he's had injuries and he's had hip injuries and I think an ACL. That may have stiffened him up a little bit, but his hands are really good. He's got good power, look really strong, compact frame. He looks like Justin Tuck in that sense because he has a lot of power to his hands, a lot of leverage. I think if you're saying he's a linebacker and defensive end, which is kind of sounds like how they're describing him, maybe he's in that David Pollock role. Maybe he is a Sam linebacker on base defense, which is really only 20%, 25% of the game at this point. And they're going to let him rush from the edge. That's the hope. The scary part about that is in camp, you have unlimited snaps. You can't let a guy, split time too much with linebackers and defensive line. There's just not that much time in the day. There's just not that much to go to both meetings, to go to take both reps. I would want him in the pass rushing reps because I think he can be a really good right end for them in due time, even help this year. So they play a lot of over-under fronts with their 4-3. So if they're saying he's a Sam linebacker at that, that's going to put him on the line of scrimmage. It'll allow him to defend the run from the line and not really put him in space as much, which I think can make them a good run defending unit if he's that guy. Because I really don't think they have a Sam on the roster right now. It sounds like they're going to play Nick Vigil there, backed up by Vincent Ray if Vigil falters. Those guys aren't your typical Sam for what the Bengals have liked him, being a bigger guy, run defending kind of linebacker. If that's Carl Lawson, I can see why that fits. I just hope they allow him to rush because I don't want to see Michael Johnson for another 900 snaps and then try and force Willis to a new side when he doesn't look like that guy on tape. He may have measured like it, but he doesn't look like it. And you have a guy like Carl Lawson sitting on the bench because you're swearing he's a linebacker or because you haven't given him enough reps on the defensive line in practice. So that there is some concern there, but I think in today's NFL, you have to get a little more versatile with your front seven. And one of the ways for a 4-3 defense to do it is that same linebacker doubling as a defensive end.
So staying in the 4th round, initially I was a little bit surprised that the Bengals went with another wide receiver after going one in the top 10. They re-signed Brandon LaFell. They drafted Tyler Boyd in the 2nd round last year. They seem to like what they have out of Cody Core. Alex Erickson is a guy who led the NFL in kickoff return yards and kickoff return average, and was an excellent preseason player last year. So he was kind of the guy that supplanted Brandon Tate last year. So even though they needed that Ross guy, the speed guy type of thing, I was a little surprised they grabbed Josh Malone, but when I see the tape, when I see the stats. Yes, there's a lot of developing to do in terms of, getting perhaps him learning some more diverse routes and things of that nature. From what I see in terms of size, weight, speed, straight line, deep threat, am I crazy about that?
No, you're not. It's funny because I felt the same way. I was surprised they took him, but I wasn't mad at all. I was like, yes, they did have a weakness at speed and at wide receiver. You kind of fell for the Kool-Aid after they re-signed LaFell. You're drinking it as they're telling you they're happy with their receivers, and as beat guys start telling you that they don't want a receiver at 9. This is a few months into the process, and you're like, maybe they are happy with their guys, but I really wish they'd get some speed at receiver. And they take Ross, then they take Mixon, and at that point, I'm going, okay, you can go in full spread or 11 personnel at the very least with 1 tight end, 1 running back, 3 wide receivers, and then they go Malone, and I go, yeah, you can go full spread at this point. You can really get speed on the field. You can do whatever you want. You can back these safeties up. Dalton's going to be able to pick his poison at that point. There's going to be someone open just based on where they align. And for the Bengals, their offense is pre-snap reads. You get maybe there's some packages where Malone and Green are on the outside, and you've got Eifert and Ross in the slot. Someone's going to be open and open very quickly. It's very exciting. Malone in particular, though, he's coming out a year early. averaged 19 yards per catch. You watch him and you're like, that looks like Chris Henry. That's a guy who's blazing down the field. He's a little thin right now. He's a little bit angular and vertical, so he struggles a little bit on his routes coming back and in his cuts. But I think a lot of it is technical and being young. I wish he attacked the ball a little bit more and went up for it. He really doesn't look like that kind of guy, even though I think he has strong hands and he's strong through contact. Letting that ball come down to him, he still shields guys away because he's got a big body. But I think he could be better if he jumped up and attacked it too. So I don't think he's a complete prospect by any means. I mean, we're in the 4th round here, but they were the 2 fastest receivers at the combine. I think that puts a complete stamp on what they're saying is we needed to get faster and we understand exactly where our weaknesses is. And they did it. They went out and got the 2 fastest receivers, and both guys I think could help relatively early.
Yeah, and again, one of those guys might be a little bit of a project, but again, this is a team that, I said it earlier in the show, they wanted to get younger, faster, more athletic, and this guy brings that. As you mentioned at the top of the show, Joe, a guy who I think had about 19.4, 19.5 yards per catch, and I think 11 touchdowns in his last season at Tennessee. And Tennessee, while they were an early season pick to be one of the top teams in college football, they kind of fell down the stretch, and some of that was because of limitations at quarterback. So, for him to put up those kinds of stats, I think was pretty impressive. Ryan Glasgow, the other 4th round pick, I think we probably both agree at this point is probably a rotational defensive tackle. It looks as if he's healthy, Andrew Billings probably steps in as the starter, at least probably for 2 downs. Maybe Ryan Glasgow spells him and moves around on the line. Am I correct in that assessment?
Yeah, I don't think he's a pass rusher. I don't think he's playing much in nickel. But a guy that is a walk-on, a hard hat, tough guy, all the white adjectives you use for these guys, he has them. He really is that kind of guy. Harbaugh talked about he needed someone to help line up the defense. Yeah, and and Glasgow was that guy. So you watch him; he's very disruptive without being super athletic. The hope and the upside, he's a Domata Echo. He's a Kyle Williams of the Buffalo Bills, 4th round guys that didn't test very well, but on tape, they're disruptive, and they find ways to anchor versus the run without being 330 pounds. Both those guys were 305 in that range coming out, 310 at most. I think Glasgow's got some weight to gain on his lower body, some strength in his lower half, and if he does that, I wouldn't be surprised if mentally he's more ready than Billings to play the nose tackle spot early, only because he did it a little bit more than Billings did. Billings did a lot of work for Baylor at nose tackle and at 3 tech. So I think there's a little bit of development for him to go inside, and coming from that conference where things are spread out a little bit more for Billings, he's going to have to get quicker and tougher as the nose tackle. For Glasgow, on the other hand, I felt like he did it, and he showed it on tape, playing against Ohio State, playing against Florida State. He had to anchor, and he had to hold double teams, and he had to play from the 1 and from the 0 tech. So he may be more ready to do it, even though I don't like his girth at nose tackle. I hate having guys that are only 300, maybe 305 at most. You'd like that nose tackle to be a little bit bigger. But I do think Glasgow, even though their defensive tackle depth is pretty good right now with young guys that need to prove themselves. I think Glasgow makes the team not only as a 4th round pick, he should make it, but I do think he can help. And I think he's the type of guy from just the way he's cut of losing a couple leaders this year in Whitworth and Doma Tapeko. He can be one of those guys that steps in if it's not this year, a year or 2 down the line.
Yeah, and you see the kind of the hustle with a player like that. You see there was talk when he was drafted. Tim Krumrie. I was thinking maybe Kimo von Oelhoffen. There's Domata Peko, another hustler, even though he had some limitations later in his career, but there is some upside there. Just to rewind a second, Peter Neefus in our YouTube chat, Joe says, how does Josh Malone compare to Marvin Jones?
I think Jones was much more agile, better route runner at this point. Attacked the ball a little bit better. I think Jones maybe had a little bit worse hands. I'm trying to think of my grades for them at this point. I really liked Marvin. I had him as a top 40 guy that year that he was drafted and was there in the 5th round. I was high-fiving everyone when they took him. Now I like Malone, but I don't think he was a top 40 guy. I know Jeff Hobson's kind of tried to sell that the last few weeks that he could have been
Yeah.
yeah, he's saying he could have went in the second round. No one was saying, no one I read or listen to had him as a second rounder, but I do like him and I do love his skill set as a young guy. So I think he's a little bit worse of a prospect, but upside wise, I think he can be a different player. I wouldn't compare him to Marvin Jones, even though I think he can provide a lot of the same things. I just think he's just not as quick in and out of his cuts, not going to be the same type of route runner. He's more of a Chris Henry to me.
Talking with Joe Goodberry, we're going through the Bengals draft picks this from a couple weeks ago, and then asking some other questions, taking your questions in the YouTube chat in on Cincy Jungle. Joe, I thought Scott Schulze was going to be joining us. He's having some technical difficulties. I thought we'd be able to get you out of here a little early, but I think you're going to be my co-host for the evening, if that's okay.
That's cool.
Hope I'm not tearing you away from family or anything. Okay. All right. Well, I apologize for that. Scott might pop back in, but he's having some technical difficulties on his end. So I think if it's okay with you, we might just continue chatting about the draft. And you may not have a choice, buddy. I might just be politely telling you that.
That's fine.
But no, thanks for being flexible, and we'll get you out of here soon. So one of the most interesting, as we kind of go round and round, one of the most interesting picks, and unfortunately Scott isn't here because this was probably his favorite pick of the entire draft, was Josh Elliott, the kicker out of Memphis. Now, a lot of people had Zane Gonzalez, the Arizona State kicker, rated ahead of Elliott, but Elliott was still one of, if not the best kicker in college football last season, consistently up there for one of the best kickers in college football throughout his entire 4 years at Memphis. Although it's a little high for a kicker to be taken, the Bengals did use, if you remember in 2009, they used a 5th round pick on Kevin Huber, and he worked out pretty well for them for the most part. This kicker, even though it's not a premium position in terms of using a draft pick, all of that sort of thing, it was probably one of, if not the biggest need in this draft for the Bengals. So your thoughts on Elliott? Was the value there in the 5th round? Was it a little bit of a reach? And should the job be his? They've got Jonathan Brown on the roster and Randy Bullock they re-signed also. Should the job be his based on what you saw in college?
It's hard to say. It's hard to ever evaluate kickers other than he made it or he missed it. For the average guy who doesn't know how to kick, to be honest with you. So when you watch him, you're like, okay, he looks like a regular kicker. He looks like he can make most of your kicks. He had a few over 50. He didn't miss an extra point. For Bengals fans, that sounds glorious. Honestly, you can kick over 45 and you're not going to mix extra points. Sign me up. So if he provides that same thing, then yeah, he's your starter. He's your guy. You spent a 5th round pick on him and a high 5th round pick. And then Zane Gonzalez didn't go for another 200 and something. I mean, it's 200 and something pick. So he was 7th rounder, I believe. A lot of people say he was the better guy. It's hard for me to split differences. If Simmons, the special teams coach, wants Elliott, I'll side with him in this case and say, okay, that's fine. A lot of people say Gonzalez was a rare kicking prospect, so I was kind of surprised that they didn't take him. Knowing that or at least I think we all suspected they'd probably take a kicker at some point after how many games they lost because of Mike Nugent last year. But yeah, you're right. Now they've got 3 guys that intrigue me going into camp. We know what Bullock can offer, I guess, as a solid veteran. If Elliott's the guy, if he doesn't miss kicks in camp and preseason, or at least, not too many, I think he's your kicker. Let's see what the other guy is. I can't remember his name, but really strong leg, right? And he was injured last year. They got him in camp now. Apparently he's got a fantastic leg. I'd love to see what he can do, if he can be that type of weapon. But yeah, as far as kickers goes, whatever, I'll take them.
Yeah. And I guess if you look at where Zane Gonzalez kicked in Arizona and where Elliott kicked in Memphis, there's a little bit more weather to deal with in Memphis than there is in Arizona. And obviously that plays a factor, being that playing in the AFC North and all of the division teams, whether it's at home at PBS or in Cleveland, in Baltimore, in Pittsburgh. All of those are outdoor stadiums that, especially as the year goes on, you have to deal with some weather. So maybe that played a factor into the decision making there. Real quickly to close up the picks, and then I've got a couple of other questions for you. Then we can get you out of here, Joe. Brandon Wilson was a guy that played some corner. I think he played some safety. And now, like Lawson, the Bengals are trying to get a little creative, and they have him officially slated as a running back. He did a little bit of that at the University of Houston. I guess there's a couple of schools of thought with him. Might he just be a guy that maybe he's a Cedric Pierman-like guy that is a Swiss Army knife type of guy where, if you need a slot corner, if you need a safety in a pinch, if you need a gunner on special teams, he's a guy that can kind of kill multiple birds with one stone, I guess, in terms of a roster spot. And that helps because there's a lot of talented receivers now on the roster, all of that. Or is this just kind of a developmental, we had 11 picks, let's see what we can do if this guy can make himself on the roster. I personally love the athleticism. It's almost like I think I said this in a post I put on Cincy Jungle that it's almost like he's back to being a high school recruit and he's being recruited as an athlete.
Yeah,
he's coming into the NFL instead of actually being in a specific position as guys normally do in the NFL. So I don't know. Do you think his future is at running back? Do you think he's more of a defensive back? Is he a kick returner? I don't really know what to make of this guy, even though I like him.
Yeah, I had the same questions. I was actually told by the Bengals running backs coach that he is not a running back. So we can put that to bed. I think, I'll take his word for it. And so that leaves him as a defensive back. And I think he's just a special teamer. I agree. I think that's where he's going to make his money as a guy that's taken in the 6th round and the 207th pick. You better be able to play special teams, and he's good at it. So you get a guy with that size who's done it all, whether it's blocking because he's been a running back, tackling and covering with safety and defensive back corner. He's done all that. So there is some good tape with him at running back, but there's also some decent tape of him at defensive back. And there's some really good tape of him kick returning. He may make a roster just doing that. I don't know who their kick returner is now. It seems like they scraped the bottom of the barrel last year and ended up finding gold in Alex Erickson. But now I feel like they can put a lot of guys back there with John Ross, with Joe Mixon, with Pac-Man Jones, with Brandon Wilson. So maybe he makes the roster there. Maybe that puts stress on some of the other special teamers, including Alex Erickson. But yeah, I think he's a special teamer. I think you label him with whatever will help you make him on the 53-man roster, because you're just trying to stash him when you do your 45-man active, 46 counting the quarterback. But when you do that, it's based on special teams, and he's a guy that's probably, if he makes the roster, is active for that reason. His workout numbers were great. He really is a upper echelon athlete. I know NFL.com had him listed as a running back, but other places had him listed as a safety. He played some nickel, as you mentioned earlier. So, and they could use a nickel. If they took a corner this year, it should be a guy that has some nickel experience in the slot. They've kind of made Josh Shaw that, even though he was kind of a safety also. And they kind of use him like a safety too. They've tried to put Darqueze Dennard in that spot. I'm not sure he's cut out for it. I'm not sure he's developing there. And they signed Ben Wickery from the Panthers, and he did it from Carolina, but he's not allowed to make the roster at this point. So maybe you get a guy like this that backs up a lot of positions, and if you need him in a pinch, he plays there.
Yeah, and I believe it was Rekha Toback at Cincy Jungle wrote a very early roster prediction post, and she had written the fact that he makes the team maybe as the 4th running back or 5th running back, but also takes a backup safety spot, something like that. Like I said, he takes, one roster spot can fill a couple of needs with a guy like that. Maybe a jack of all trades, master of none type of guy. And Joe, we'll close up the class and your thoughts of each pick, and then I've got a couple more questions. Normally I wouldn't spend a lot of time on a 7th round pick, Mason Schreck, but from what I've read on your Twitter handle at Joe Goodberry, by the way, for the listeners, in case you're not following him, go do that. I normally wouldn't spend a lot of time with him. Developmental tight end, smaller school from Buffalo. Number one, you live up there, so you probably know quite a bit more about this kid than a lot of us do. But it sounds like you went back and watched the tape, and you really like what you saw from this kid. Now, the Bengals have taken tight ends and guys like that, whether they're late in the draft or undrafted free agents, and they've been roster staples. Ryan Hewitt is one, even though he's more of an H-back at this point. I don't know. Does this kid have skills to potentially be a backup tight end? Is he more of an inline blocker, a pass catcher? Can he do it all? What do you think?
Yeah, and you'd probably be surprised if I said I had no idea who he was before the draft, because even though he's in Buffalo and I'm in Buffalo, they don't talk about the UB Bowls at all locally here. I mean, I couldn't name you a player.
Unless it's Khalil Mack or something, right?
Yeah, right. And then it was still, you think they would have talked about it a little bit more. But anyways, so I go back and I go on YouTube, and somebody posted a lot of all 22 cut-ups of almost every single one of his receptions, I believe, and a few nice blocks. His athleticism profile puts him in the above average category. He's a really natural receiver. He runs really good routes. He knows how to sit in holes in zone defenses. Good hands. I thought he attacked the ball pretty well when it was in the air, boxed defenders out on long balls. Surprisingly, he was a very, very good receiver with a bad quarterback. And really, it's against bad competition, but you got to dominate, and he pretty much did. And I thought he had some decent blocks. He's a big guy with an above average profile in terms of athleticism. And this was a great tight end class. I bet Mason Schreck goes a little bit earlier in a weaker tight end class. He could have been an earlier day 3 pick. He's an ideal guy with that profile to play special teams, and maybe he makes the roster. If not, he's on your practice squad for a year or so. They like the young guys they have right now. They have a young tight end group that they've drafted pretty much in the last 3-4 years now. But eventually someone's going to have to step up into those backup roles. I like Schreck as a prospect, especially in 7th round. He can receive, he can block, he's big, and he is above average athleticism. It sounds like he had a good rookie mini camp too. So sign me up for that. Yeah. In the 7th round.
Yeah. And if anything, I mean, he's got a cool last name,
That's true.
Likened to the movie character. Talking with Joe Goodberry on Twitter at Joe Goodberry. He didn't know this going into tonight, but he's been my co-host for the evening. So Joe, thanks for taking a little more time than you had anticipated talking with us about the Bengals draft class. We've got some questions. I've got a couple. There's a couple in the chat room, and then we'll get you out of here.
Okay.
Let me see here. Other than Ross and Mixon, which rookie do you think will produce the most? Mr. Sinister asks in the YouTube chat.
Let's say Jake Elliott, because being a 5th round pick at kicker, you don't spend a pick like that unless the guy's going to make the roster, or unless you feel strongly that he's your guy. And if that's the case, even if he doesn't play extremely well year 1, he's probably an upgrade to Mike Nugent. So, yeah, he never had a kick return for a touchdown on a kickoff. I'm saying for Elliott, he didn't miss any extra points, and he can kick over 50 yards. That's an impact already for this team. So I would say he has the next impact. I think most people would pick Jordan Willis. He's maybe a little bit of a developmental guy. Like I said, I think he's better on the left side than the right side, and that's what they really need. So I don't know where he fits in early. I think he eventually gets playing time. But I think if you're just looking at an instant starter, Elliott makes sense.
Good call and a safe one. You look at rounds 3 and 4 where you have all those other exciting names that could be value picks, and then you look at round 5 and you say, well, there's a guy in the 5th round that could be just a regular starter, even though it's on special teams for you. And K Rhodes in the chat says, does Marvin Lewis play the rookies this year? Obviously, that comes with caveats. There's some that probably will play, some that won't. You mentioned Elliott. You probably think that he's a guy that could be out there and playing quite a bit for the Bengals. But and I've got a post on this coming up on Cincy Jungle this week. But the Bengals have shed a lot of the older guys, either by their own volition or not. Demotipeco's gone. They've let a lot of Andrew Whitworth's gone, and that's kind of a bummer. But the older guys are gone, and they've paved the way for a lot of new guys to come in and take spots. So one is inclined to think that this might be a year where the Bengals rely more on their past 2 or 3 draft classes. Do you think that's the case, or do you think that these guys still need some development and they're going to be hesitant like they usually are with some of their draft picks?
Well, yeah. I mean, obviously, some guys need some development, and the Bengals always scare you when it comes to playing young guys. I think last year in particular, when they choose Cedric Pearman over William Jackson coming back. I think that was a punch to everyone's gut. Like, come on, this is your first round pick. You guys told us he's your guy, and we trust us. We're taking a corner again because Jackson's so good. And here you go, choosing a special teamers. Well, I think when they think they're better than they actually are, they don't play their rookies. And then they have a bad year. It seems like they come back and they will lean on rookies at that point. This might be one of those scenarios. I think Ross helps them. I think Mixon helps them. I think they understand that. I think Willis and Lawson help and are better than the backups. So it's hard for me to say those guys don't play and don't play early. I think Malone probably is an inactive guy on the roster, especially early. I think Glasgow, while I do think he can get in there and play, I can see them activating only 3 defensive tackles a lot of weeks, and the third one being Pat Sims or Marcus Hardison, Deshaun Williams. I'm not sure who makes it as that guy, but I could see them being active over Glasgow early. JJ Dielman, I bet, is active all year if he makes the roster at all. Inactive, I hope I said there. I think Jordan Evans and Brandon Wilson play on special teams, and I expect them to make the team. So at some point they'll have an impact. I don't know if Shrek makes the roster, but he's on the practice squad. If he does, it's probably a special teamer. So I think looking at the class as a whole, most of them should play early based on either talent or the positions they drafted were positions of severe weakness. Yeah. And I like, especially pass rusher and getting athletes at linebacker, which Evans counts, Lawson can count, I guess, and the back end special teams guys now moving up. So I think that they play at some point.
Shame on me. I omitted Dielman and Evans from our discussion a little bit. Any additional thoughts? You and I, before the show came on, talked a little bit about Dielman and the fact that he's a versatile guy and he's that lineman that they love, the guy who kind of has the mean streak, but can play a couple of different positions. He played center. I think he played tackle, maybe could play guard. Your thoughts on him, as well as Evans, a guy in the 6th round who as I went back and looked at some of his tape and stats, I actually came away a bit impressed. He's not a thumper. He's not a guy who, will make the huge hit. Sometimes misses some tackles, but he's kind of that rangy guy that could pick the ball off and spark a big play. I think he had 4 interceptions last year alone, 2 returned for touchdowns. So your thoughts on both Dielman and Evans quickly as we start to wrap things up.
Yeah, Dielman was probably my least favorite pick out of all of them. I thought they'd probably take 2 offensive linemen at some point, especially with the state of the line going into this year and really not having the backups being developmental guys right now, which were Fisher and Oboye last year and the year before, are now your starters. So you should probably get some guys back there just in case. Dielman, only 5 starts at center, and they call him a center. So there's going to be some development going on there. He's a ways away from being a center, especially at a 6'5" guy at 305. He's kind of thin for that. I started 26 games at right tackle. And when you're a right tackle in college, a lot of times people will say you're a guard. So I think he's probably a guard or a center, but either one he's probably not ready for. He spends a lot of time on the ground rather than, he's a fighter, but because of it, he loses balance. He doesn't always have the correct leverage, doesn't always have the good hand placement, and he gets thrown around a lot because of it. But he's willing to get up and battle through it, which is great to see. but knowing he's going to go against bigger, stronger guys in the NFL, he's got some development to go. I agree with Evans. Evans was a guy that flashed a bunch. I knew about him in college, didn't really study him before the draft, but after I was like, okay, let me go watch this guy because I remember his pro day workouts were insane. And I go back and watch, and I'm like, yep, they got an athlete. Here it is to continue the trend throughout the whole draft. They got athletes, whether it was on tape or on testing, or some cases it was both. With Evans, he looks fast on tape. He looks athletic on tape. He's natural in space, and his athletic profile puts him up there as he's probably our at most athletic linebacker from day one. So not only does that help special teams, but you may have got a potential starter in the 6th round, a guy that could develop. He needs to get stronger. He needs to get a little more aggressive, a little more physical, but everything else that the Bengals lack at linebacker, he already has and possesses, and as shown it on tape.
Yeah, 4.5 40 at 6. I think he's 6'2", 235. Had close to I think it was 38.5-inch vertical at his pro day. Just really helped his stock. I think if obviously the Bengals didn't take him, then he was probably going to get taken somewhere around that spot. Developmental guy, but a guy that could be a better version of Emmanuel Lemur, who had some bright spots with the Bengals. Didn't have some good times with the Bengals. Could be a guy like that, maybe better version. Probably will push Nick Vigil for some time later down the road, but we'll see. Let's get you out of here on this, Joe. There's kind of a lot of questions in the chat room that are similar to this, but I'm gonna claim it as my own. What current veterans or what current Bengals players should be put on notice, either from the 11 picks that they made or the undrafted rookie class that they brought in? What guys that are current, either tenured starters, tenured veterans, what guys do you think should be put on notice and or might be shown the door in a surprising fashion because of some of these guys that they brought in?
Yeah, and I mentioned this earlier. The obvious one is Jeremy Hill at running back, but I think even Giovanni Bernard should be aware of the fact that Mixon can do a lot of what Bernard can do, and a lot of it better. He's got better hands. He runs better routes than Bernard, and he's bigger, so they can use him in all situations. So even when Gio is healthy, I think he has to work a little bit harder to have his same role that he always had handed to him for the most part. Obviously, Michael Johnson had a down year and really hasn't been good in a few years now. Drafting 2 pass rushers should be completely understanding that his snap should probably be cut in half. He probably shouldn't take 850 snaps again. But not just him, his backups. I think Wallace Gilberry, even though he was re-signed, I think Will Clark in the last year of his deal should probably fall behind Lawson and Willis in pass rush snaps. I think Clark could probably potentially not make the roster. Wallace Gilberry didn't make the roster pretty much last year and had to be brought back after he was cut from the Lions. So those guys should definitely be put on notice right there. I think Cody Core, they may have liked you, but unless they see another jump in development, Josh Malone could have your spot right away. I think Cody Core has to show better on special teams. I think Alex Erickson has to show he can play more at wide receiver than just being a special teamer and kick returner. Those guys have to be aware that they just brought in 2 receivers, and Malone can play a lot of what Core offered as kind of a raw speed guy, especially last year. If Core takes the next step, he'll find his way on the roster and save himself a spot. But if not, maybe they don't keep 7. Maybe just because they have to keep an extra lineman this year, they got to go 6 receivers, maybe even 5. Let's hope not, because I think they have the depth there. But these guys should be aware of that. I think another guy that continues to make the roster that was very similar to an Evans pick was Marquise Flowers a few years ago. Continues to make it as a special teamer, but now when you have Evans coming in on a rookie deal, provides a lot of the same things and now has probably more potential to be a starter down the line. That's an easy swap right there. I think Flowers finally probably doesn't make the roster and Evans jumps into that spot. And I think probably some of these undrafted linebackers look pretty good, whether it's a Hardy Nickerson Jr. Could make a spot at the back end of the roster, because I think they probably still need some depth at linebacker, especially for special teams.
Yeah, and for the younger folks out there listening, Hardy Nickerson, his his father was a great football player on some awful football teams. If you remember, he was a great Buccaneers. Well, I don't know if I should say great, but he was a very, very good football player on some very terrible Buccaneers teams.
He might have been great
now,
if his teams were good.
Yeah, I mean, if he was in those late 90s, early 2000s Buccaneers teams where they were always in the playoffs and whatnot, I mean, I think he would have been a much more high-profile guy. He was a good player for a long time on some very bad teams. Joe, I'm going to get you out of here on this. It's not so much draft-related, but I guess if you look back to 2016, the 2016 draft class, it sort of is, and you follow the Bengals ardently. What are your feelings on the Adam Jones situation? I kind of want to get your opinion on what's going on with him. Obviously, as I mentioned, the Bengals took William Jackson III last year. They re-signed Dre Kirkpatrick this offseason. They added Wilson. They didn't go for the high cornerback necessarily this time. They have Shaw. I don't know, man. I'm kind of at the end of my rope with this guy personally. And more stuff. Now he's gotten in a car accident, and there's video of him cursing out multiple different people. One of them being a 911 operator, another being the person who hit him. And there's very polarizing opinions with this guy. I saw still a pretty good player last year, but there was definitely a dip in production from 2016 than there in 2015. Is he worth the headache at this point, especially when you bring in a guy like Mixon?
No, he's not worth the headache. I don't think after the playoff debacle versus the Steelers was a perfect time. He's going into free agency. You could have wiped your hands there of him and said, you revived your career. You've been a solid player, but we're going to move on. And instead they signed him to a 3-year deal. It can be a 2-year deal with an option on the last year. Excuse me. But yeah, they draft William Jackson. I think Jackson is the best prospect they've drafted at corner in the last 5 years. They've spent a lot of picks on that position. I think he's the best guy. I want to see him play. And the hard part is Kirkpatrick, Pac-Man, and Jackson, none of them have slot experience, or at least not extensive slot experience, so a few snaps here or there. You can't find a way to get all three of them on there unless you're moving somebody into a role that they're probably not very experienced with. So I hate the idea of having Jackson on the bench the way they've done with Kirkpatrick, the way they've done with Darqueze Dennard, and you don't know what they have in these guys until year 3, year 4, and they're picking up Dennard's option, and they don't even know what he is yet. And I don't want that for Jackson, a guy I feel like could be their number one corner. And then here's Pac-Man continuously shining a bad light on the team. And I don't know, what he's done aren't big things for the most part, besides telling a cop to die and spitting on a nurse. That's scumbag stuff. But, since then, just going crazy on Twitter or on Instagram, yelling at people, sure. But it's just a string of bad decisions for a guy that isn't as good as he was for about a year and a half of his good football for the Bengals. And they got talent behind him. I want to see Dennard play. I want to see Jackson play. I want to see what Kavari Russell has. He was a 3rd-round pick. I want to see if he can play at all. He was a 3rd-round pick for the Chiefs, but still. So for me, I think this draft, as good as it was and as good as it is, the way they handled free agency this year looks even worse. I would love this team right now if they could retain both offensive linemen, or at least one of them. And you could have done it by releasing Pac-Man, by not signing LaFell, because now LaFell looks kind of redundant. I don't know what his role is. He's going to play, but I don't know how much, and it's definitely going to be less than last year. And if you don't sign Andre Smith, that money goes to Zietler and Whitworth. And I would think this team is a Super Bowl contender, and it rids you of a player that lets fans make fun of your team. For me, as a Bengals fan, and I'm tired of defending the team for bringing on these clowns, and they continuously make the team look bad. I'm ready to move on. I feel the same way as you, and I'm ready to see William Jackson on the field.
Yeah, I mean, he was a guy that also wowed at the combine. William Jackson, that is. I think he ran a 4.43, 4.35, something like that. Very athletic guy, and he was a little bit of a late riser. I mean, he was kind of a 2nd-round guy, and then all of a sudden he was just a guy that a lot of people loved, and unfortunately his rookie year was cut short before it really began last year. I agree with you on the offensive line. I think that I think if the Bengals would have kept one of those two, Whitworth or Zeitler, I think that this team would have been in a lot better shape. Even if they, maybe they get Whitworth and they still re-sign Andre Smith as some sort of insurance policy, a 1-year stopgap at right tackle, that sort of thing. Continue to let Fisher and Aboyehi develop. I think they would have been in a lot better shape. But Joe, you killed it tonight, man. I appreciate you being here for as long as you have. I know it's late on your end. I'm sorry to keep you so long. Hopefully you can still go get some sleep, and we'd love to have you back. We won't keep you. I said this the first time too. I think I said this time. We won't keep you as long next time, but greatly appreciate it, especially since we had some technical difficulties with Scott. Thanks for all the knowledge. Thanks for what you do. Go follow Joe Goodberry on Twitter at Joe Goodberry. Did you see Guardians of the Galaxy 2, by the way? I know you're a big Marvel.
I have not yet, only because kids and life, but we're planning on it this weekend. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the wife and I are going to try and go see that. She really enjoyed the first one, and I've heard good things. So
I have too. I'm very excited.
Yeah, I hope you get either a date night or take your kids out to go see it, whatever it is. Go have some fun. Appreciate you stepping in, man. Great stuff.
Thanks for having me, Anthony. You guys are good people over there. Anytime you need me.
All right, appreciate it, buddy. This has been the Orange and Black Insider. If we thank you, all of you who have joined us live. There's been a lot of you. A lot of you asked questions of Joe in the YouTube chat. We greatly appreciate that. You can also stream the show through Cincy Jungle live as we do this. We also, if you're not able to join us live, you can get the show on iTunes. You can get it on SoundCloud. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel and get all the video content. We are able to, you can get in touch with the show on Twitter at BengalsOBI. You can email us, theobinsider@gmail.com. I'm at CJ Anthony CUI on Twitter. Again, I mentioned Joe Goodberry at Joe Goodberry on Twitter. Go give him a follow. Thanks for tuning in. This has been the Orange and Black Insider Bengals fan podcast. And let's hope that the optimism that Joe and I share of this 2017 draft class translates to on-field success. Thanks for listening.